today. Ukraine's Zelensky and European leaders prepare to meet with President Trump to discuss a peace deal for Ukraine after the US leaders' meeting with Putin. Hamas rejects Israel's plan to move Palestinians south as the Israeli military prepares to take over Gaza City. Swatch faces backlash in China over an ad dubbed a racist trope. And Bolivia's ruling party faces its worst defeat in a generation. It's Monday, August 18th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes, 7 days a week. I'm Kim Vanel in Whanganui, New Zealand. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskiy has arrived in the US as he and his European allies prepare to meet with President Donald Trump later today. Amid fears, the US leader could try to pressure Kyiv into accepting a settlement favourable to Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. Sources say a proposal put forward by Russia's Vladimir Putin would see Moscow give up small pockets of occupied territory, while Ukraine would cede a fortified swath of land in the east and agree to freeze the front lines elsewhere. The Europeans are hoping to bolster Ukraine's hand by showing up in force, with the leaders of Germany, the UK, France, Italy and Finland all attending. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will also be there and says Europe will make sure Ukraine gets security guarantees.
I often said Ukraine must become a steel porcupine, undigestible for potential invaders.
Max Hunder is in Kyiv.
Zelensky and the Europeans know going into this meeting that they still need America to some extent. America is the big global superpower and it provides military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine, without which Ukraine would find it much harder to fight the war. And that means they have to try to keep Trump on board, even if he's saying things that are pretty contrary to the publicly expressed goals and interests of Ukraine. But I think if they're presented with a deal that's unacceptable, they probably can and they will just say that they're going to walk away. Ukraine, with European backing, is still capable of continuing to fight this war.
The last time Zelensky met Trump, it was pretty disastrous. But Max says Ukraine's leader seems unfazed about returning to the Oval Office.
He was asked about this yesterday, and Zelensky seemed in quite good spirits. He said he was ready for a productive conversation. And I think the attendance of European leaders who Trump gets along with and likes will just take the heat out of things a little bit, imbue the whole thing with a more respectful and convivial tone.
In a post on Truth Social, President Trump said Zelensky could end the war almost immediately, suggesting Ukraine should drop its ambitions to reclaim Crimea and should abandon its NATO bid. White House reporter Trevor Honeycutt says Trump is very keen to get a deal over the line.
The president has positioned himself as kind of a peacemaker, especially in this second term, somebody who's kind of going around to various conflicts and using leverage to solve them. And he's positioned himself as a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. So it's very important on that front. It's also important because the United States has been providing security assistance to Ukraine, providing diplomatic support, providing money, weapons, and the U.S. public is very divided about that.
The dollar is bracing for a busy week ahead, with traders watching that Trump-Zelenskiy meet closely, as well as the upcoming Federal Reserve Jackson Hole Symposium. Markets are now pricing in an 84% chance of a quarter-point Fed rate cut in September, down from 98% last week, after US economic data dimmed prospects for a larger 50 basis point cut. In Gaza City, a column of traffic, donkeys with carts, vans piled with mattresses, move slowly out of town. People are fleeing after Israel announced its plan for the military to take control of the city and to relocate residents to the south of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is rejecting the plan, calling it a new wave of genocide and displacement. Palestinian man Bilal Abu Sitta agrees. He says if he goes, he'll be forced to walk the distance with his wife, children, and elderly parents. In Israel, meanwhile, thousands of people took to the street in a nationwide strike in support of the families of hostages in Gaza and calling for an end to the war. Many Israelis fear the government plan to seize Gaza City could risk the lives of the 20 or so hostages thought to still be alive. Hurricane Erin has re-intensified into a Category 4 storm. The US National Hurricane Center is warning of life-threatening surf and rip currents along the eastern seaboard as a result. Right now, the hurricane is about 1,000 miles off North Carolina with winds of up to 130 miles an hour. An historic night in Bolivia, where the ruling left-wing party is on track to suffer its worst defeat in a generation. The presidential election is heading toward a runoff, with early exit polls showing no candidate securing enough support for an outright win. Lucinda Elliott is covering the race and says the ruling party is being punished for mismanaging the economy that's buckling under high inflation.
Bolivians can no longer freely access their dollar savings because of a currency crisis. On the black market, the dollar is selling for twice the amount as the official pegged rate. And this is really hurting many voters already living in one of South America's poorest countries. And the election result, if it's confirmed in full, could really mark the end of nearly 20 years of leftist rule in this lithium-rich country, and for the first time see a centre or centre-right government come in. And that's important for investors who are keen to see a shift to a more pro-business administration. You know, many of Bolivia's companies, its natural gas and its energy firms are state-owned. And so this will be a sign for the kind of wider business community this week, as the two main leading candidates have already acknowledged the need for austerity measures and to also open up the economy.
Air Canada's planes remain grounded on Monday morning after striking flight attendants refused an order to return to work. A Labour Relations Board has ordered the union to start binding arbitration and get staff back on shift. But the union said no, setting up an almost unprecedented standoff with the Canadian government, which has requested the order. Swiss watchmaker Swatch is apologising for ads featuring images of an Asian male model pulling the corners of his eyes back with his fingertips. The ad sparked swift backlash in China, where many said the imagery was offensive and perpetuated harmful stereotypes. Casey Hall is in Shanghai.
A lot of the commentary about this ad on Chinese social media is talking about how it leans on racist tropes about Asian eyes. I do think the most common comment that I've seen is really, what were they thinking? You know, Swatch is a big company with a long history in the China and Asian markets. And people just seem kind of astounded that this kind of got through the checks and balances process and even came out.
And this is a delicate time for Swatch, right?
It is a delicate time for Swatch. They've traditionally been very exposed to the China market. The China consumer market, as everybody knows, has slowed in recent years. And Swatch sales globally have slowed, even though they've seen some strength in other markets like the US and Japan. The slowdown in China has affected their sales globally. This is not a great thing to happen for a company like Swatch that is so heavily dependent on China.
And for today's recommended read, a look at the career of actor Terence Stamp, who's died aged 87. Known for his role in The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and as arch-villain General Zod in Superman and Superman 2, he also missed out on succeeding Sean Connery as James Bond. There's a link to his obituary in the pod description. For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player. If you're listening on a smart speaker, just ask for the latest news from Reuters 7 days a week. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.